John chapter 20, beginning at verse 1. On Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. She ran to Simon Peter and to Jesus' favorite disciple and said, "They have taken the Lord from the tomb. We don't know where they have put him." Peter and the other disciple set off for the tomb. They ran side by side until the other disciple ran faster than Peter and got there first. He bent over and saw the strips of linen cloth lying inside the tomb, but he did not go in. When Simon Peter got there, he went into the tomb and saw the strips of cloth. He also saw the piece of cloth that had been used to cover Jesus' face. It was rolled up and in a place by itself. The disciple who got there first went into the tomb, and when he saw it, he believed. At that time, Peter and the other disciple did not know that the scripture said Jesus would rise to life. So the two of them went back to the other disciples. Mary Magdalene stood crying outside the tomb. She was still weeping when she stooped down and saw two angels inside. They were dressed in white and were sitting where Jesus' body had been. One was at the head and the other was at the foot. The angels asked Mary, "Why are you crying?" She answered, "They have taken away my Lord's body. I don't know where they have put him." As soon as Mary said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not know who he was. And Jesus asked her, "Why are you crying? Who are you looking for?" She thought he was the gardener and said, "Sir, if you have taken his body away, please tell me so I can go and get him." Then Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned and said to him, "Rabboni." The Aramaic word Rabboni means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Don't hold on to me. I have not yet gone to the Father. But tell my disciples that I am going to the one who is my Father and my God, as well as your Father and your God." Mary Magdalene then went and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord. She also told them what he had said to her. Did you hear the one about the nun? Sister Mary Catherine is entering the monastery. She meets with the head of the monastery, a priest, Father O'Sullivan, who says to her, "Sister Mary Catherine, in this place we keep a discipline of silence. From now on you must keep the silence." 5 years go by. Sister Mary Catherine meets with Father O'Sullivan, who tells her, "You can say 2 words. Sister Mary Catherine says, "Bad food." Father says, "Oh, I'm so sorry about the food, sister. We will have that addressed immediately." Another 5 years go by. Sister Mary Catherine has kept the silence. She meets again with Father O'Sullivan, who says, "You may say 2 words. Sister Mary Catherine says, "Hard bed." Father O'Sullivan says, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Sister Mary Catherine. We will get you a new mattress." Another 5 years go by. It has been 15 years since Sister Mary Catherine came to the monastery. She meets with Father O'Sullivan again, who tells her she may say 2 words. Sister Mary Catherine says, "I quit." Father O'Sullivan says, "Well, I really think it is best that you quit. All you have done is complain since you've got here." In my imagination, this is how you would respond to such a joke that I would tell at church. but this is likely closer to reality. I only have two jokes that I can remember. The other is about a traveling salesman who buys his mother a talking bird, but I think I've already told you that one, maybe more than once. I'm one of these people who has trouble remembering jokes, or I remember bits and pieces. The ones I tend to remember are ones that feature primates, gorillas, chimpanzees, or about members of the clergy who play golf. It may seem irreverent to tell jokes on this, the most sacred day of the Christian year, but the truth is that there is a long-standing tradition among the Orthodox of doing just that, telling good ones on Easter morning. Not as one would expect, to warm up the crowd or to convey the notion that despite the Genevan gown and collar, the preacher is a human being. No, jokes are told on Easter morning in honor of the author of the great divine comedy. We believe that despite 2,000 years of poor public relations, God is and continues to be a humorist. To be sure, a good argument could be made that the greatest joke ever played in history unfolded on Easter morning. The key to a good joke is the unexpected surprise at the end. A joke is a form of narrative that sets up expectations in your mind. A paradox, you expect the unexpected. When I say to you, have you heard the one about, this is a clue for you to listen for some turn of events where someone will say something or do something that is astonishing and absurd. And when it works well, you can't help but laugh. Strictly speaking, the Easter story is a comedy. In a sense, we gather on Easter morning to hear the greatest punchline ever delivered, and as far as I know, you can't hear it anywhere else. Have you heard the one about the man who was put to death on Friday? Well, you'll never guess what happened on Sunday. Now, it may be hard to hear the Easter story as something really absurd and hilarious. We have heard it many times before. Familiarity may have dulled its impact. How many times have we recited the creed, I believe in the resurrection, in monotone, with sober faces, as if it was the most reasonable thing in the world? We in the church have tried with great ingenuity to make it less absurd than it really is, and to a great extent we have succeeded. Poets have helped us in this endeavor. The resurrection is like the crocus. It is like the lily pushing up through the snow in spring. It is like the return of spring. And yet it is strange that none of the disciples employed such metaphor to describe their experience of the resurrection. When it finally dawned on Peter what had come about that morning, that Jesus had risen from the dead, he didn't shrug his shoulders and say, well, it's just like the return of spring. In truth, there was nothing natural or reasonable about it. There was no precedent for it. It was not really like the return of spring. It was not really like anything else. Who would believe it? In fact, from all four gospel accounts, we get the sense that there was a lot of confusion and running around on Easter morning. Follow Peter on that morning. He's running all over the place, panic-stricken, half-terrified, breathless, dumbfounded. One gospel writer says the disciples were disturbed by joy. Luke says that when the women returned with the story of the empty tomb, it seemed to the disciples an idle tale. In other words, it seemed to them like a joke. Too good to be true. He was dead on Friday. They were sure of it. Now is this what we hear? He's alive? It may be hard to hear about resurrection because so much of life teaches the opposite. It stands against almost everything we know to be true. And we are such reasonable and sober-minded people. And in our reasonable world, dead men don't come back to life. It just doesn't happen. John Masefield's poem, The Widow on the By Street, describes a young man who is about to be executed for crimes against the state. Among those who are watching is his widowed mother. As the trapdoor is loose, the rope is stretched. As his lifeless body slumps, so does his mother in the arms of those around her. She is heard to say something like, too broken to mend, over and over again, too broken to mend. Death is like that. It's too broken to mend. Death is the natural end to our earthly life. It comes to all of us. What is it that someone said? Life is a sexually transmitted terminal disease. Death is inevitable. We say goodbye, we pay our respects, and we go on with our lives as best we can. And that is all Mary was doing on that first Easter morning, paying her respects, going to the tomb to convince herself it was all true, and to struggle to comprehend how it could be that the darkness had overcome him. Mary wanted to stand alone a while and remember her friend. The tragic is inevitable, but what was to happen next was unforeseeable. Each of the gospel writers carry a slightly different version of the events that transpired on that morning. As I said before, there was a lot of confusion and running around that followed. But whatever the differences of the gospel accounts, the consensus of the New Testament writers was that Christ had risen from the dead. The man who was put to death on Friday, dead, was now alive. And it is upon this one and central miracle that the church stands or falls. Without the resurrection, Christianity is like a joke without a punchline. It doesn't make sense. It is, says C.H. Dodd, not a belief that grew up within the church. It is the belief around which the church itself grew, and the given upon which its faith was based. Likewise, St. Paul said, if Christ has not been raised, then our proclamation has been in vain. If for this life only we have hoped in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied. In his book, The Quest for Beauty, Rollo May recalls scenes from his lifelong search for beauty. Among them a visit to Mount Athos, a Greek peninsula on which there are a number of monasteries. Rollo May tells of one particular morning when he happened to stumble upon a celebration of the Greek Orthodox Easter. He arrived at the tail end of the church service that had been proceeding all night long. Incense hung in the air. The only light came from candles. And at the height of the service, members of the congregation came forward, and one by one the priest gave each person 3 Easter eggs, wonderfully decorated and wrapped in a veil. As he did this, he said, Christos Anastai, Christ is risen. And each person, including Rollo May, responded according to the custom, he is risen indeed. Rollo May writes, I was seized by the moment of spiritual reality. What would it mean for our world if Christ had truly risen? Easter calls us to reconsider, to rethink what life has taught us, that there is a beginning and an end. As sure as you are born, you will die, and death is the end. The Easter event calls these assumptions into question. It suggests an epilogue to death, which is new life. What would it mean if Christ had truly risen? What would it mean if death were not the end? What would it mean if life was not a tragedy, but a comedy? Well, perhaps after your Easter meal this afternoon or this evening, you will push back your chairs, and over a cup of coffee or tea, you might share a joke or two. You can tell the one about Mary Catherine at the monastery if you like. Maybe you know one about a Presbyterian minister who went golfing. If you tell that joke, I promise I won't be offended. Maybe in the telling of jokes you will start a tradition around Easter to honor the one who started it all. And may you hear in the laughter of others the high and holy laughter of God echoing forth from the dark and empty tomb.